You all are going to love our afternoon. We have so many wonderful things planned, but we're going to start with a panel that we're calling Closing the Loop. And I want to welcome Tami and Kristin and Dr. Tracy Freeman and Matt back to the stage to continue the conversation. Welcome everyone back.
Feeling hot, hot, hot. Feeling hot, hot, hot. Feeling hot, hot, hot. Feeling hot, hot, hot.
So we thought that it would be great to be able to ask some questions that you guys are thinking about to the people that spoke this morning. But before we do that, we wanted to ask everybody if you had like a postscript, something you feel like you hadn't said yet or missed saying in your speech, or at lunch someone asked you a question. So if everyone could take like 5 minutes or less and just fill us in on what you're thinking. And Tami, does Tami want to start? Kristin?
I guess the only thing that I would add to my presentation, I had a lot of people approach me and ask me about various things, but a lot of my patients come to me for weight loss, especially postmenopausal women, where it just becomes so much more challenging to lose weight after the age of 45 plus. So I just have a positive thing to say, which is that like it is so hard, it is so difficult, but eventually you will find what works for you. Because I've had so many patients that have come to me and said, well, I've done everything and nothing works, so nothing's going to work. And I don't think that's necessarily true. But you have to get with the right experts and find the right team and just kind of build your village and you'll figure out what will work for you. And then, you know, I was telling someone earlier today at lunch that we've had a lot of discussions about genomics and genes. And I tell my patients, well, let's improve your genes, being your genomics first, and then once that works, then you'll look better in your genes. And oftentimes we start the opposite way. We want to look better in our genes and we'll do anything to get there. And then we screw up our microbiome in the process, right? So like you have to think about the inner beauty first. And ultimately that's the most important thing. And then your genes will look great if you do that.
Thanks.
So the only thing I can think of that I didn't say on anxiety is electromagnetic fields and how they impact your mood. So we were designed to radiate with the earth, right? We're meant to kind of ground and get feedback from the earth. But when we're on cell phones, surrounded by Wi-Fi, everything we have is so digitalized, we're getting distorted signals. And the population, I've seen it in my own home, I have a child on the spectrum, is that, for instance, when they put the smart meter on our house, right? No one asks your permission. They just come and lay that on your house, and they slip something on your door saying, we put the smart meter on. And from that day, for another 2 weeks until it hit me, oh my gosh, this child hasn't slept in 2 weeks since that smart meter came on. So he's the canary in the coal mine, right? So it's affecting all of us, but he acts it out. So then I bought a grounding sheet online, and I thought, well, he's acting berserk, so I'm going to put it under his head. But of course, you ground through your feet, so that didn't work. But the moment I put it under his feet, he slept through the night. So he is the person who lets you know something's bad for you, right on the money. Whereas the rest of us, we're kind of exposed, and we have no idea that we're feeling agitated. In my office that I moved to, that was in before this one, the office was on top of the building's electronic room. And a friend of mine came in and said, let me just, right when I was about to sign the lease for that room, he came in, let me just inspect it. And he said, you have to get out of here right away. It had levels that were leukemia levels in terms of electromagnetic radiation. And my assistant, who was sitting at the front desk next to 2 Wi-Fis and getting the worst of it, she was so irritable, and then I bought her something to ground on, and she got really nice. You know, I never told her that. I never said you're being kind of irritable, but then I saw her calm down, right? I saw her demeanor kind of calmed down. She was snippy with patients, and that left. So that is the only other thing I would say that affects your mood, and you have no clue, right? You don't necessarily feel it bothering you, but it's certainly not healthy.
Yeah, the environment matters. My 1-year-old was having trouble sleeping. I realized the Wi-Fi router was in her room, and when I started unplugging it at night, her sleep got better. So I don't have really anything to add. My favorite part of these conferences are the conversations, so I'm really excited for your questions.
So let's open it up to question. Do we have the runners? Okay, how about you? And they'll hand you a mic.
So we have a lot of cranky people in my office. So when you bought them something to ground them, what is that something?
So there's a website called earthing.com, and they sell, it's a silver-colored thing that you plug into the ground. You know, there's 2 prongs and there's a ground in the outlet. And so I still sit on that now, even though I'm in a better office now. I don't feel anything, but I know from my son that it works. So it does help. And you can check the ground. They send you something you plug in to make sure the ground is actually working, because not all outlets the ground is working. So they send that as well, and they send you a book on earthing too. So and then you can also just be barefoot. That's pretty easy, but that doesn't work in an office setting too well.
Hi. I actually, following up on that, I was wondering, do you think that these iPhone watches could have that effect on people? Since all day long it's kind of transmitting things right into our wrists?
It does. They do put off electromagnetic fields. Even the Oura Ring, which I spoke about, I put it on airplane mode at night so it's not transmitting. So when I see people sleeping with a lot of sleep tracking devices, it worries me because it's probably negatively affecting them if they don't put it in airplane mode. So that's what you can do for your watch if you want to shut that down. During the daytime, it's having some effect. On your sleep is what I would be most worried about. So it's an issue during the day. During the night is when it's really going to be. I had a patient yesterday that told me she can't get to sleep unless she's playing something on her phone underneath her pillow. And that's just the worst thing I can imagine, putting that right next to your head while you sleep. So put your phone, other devices on airplane mode at night to mitigate that.
So over here, Sam? And then we'll take Ellen next.
This question is for Tami. I was wondering, in your spiritual journeys, what would you recommend a person who wants to really hone into their intuition and make it stronger? Thank you.
Is that person you? Yeah. All right. Because I do think, just like with medicine, when it comes to one's spiritual journey, it's incredibly personal. I taught meditation for a long time, and the person who taught me meditation said, you can't teach everyone in the room the same style of meditation, because some people actually do better when they're moving, and some people do better when they're lying down, but we're going to teach people meditation anyway, but it's a caveat. So here you're asking about your intuition, and I would first ask you some questions. See, I don't even know your professions, you guys, but, first listen and have a conversation, which is, what do you already know about how your intuition works?
Well, with my intuition, I really listen to my body and how my body feels during that situation.
And what do you know about your body's signals?
So it's intuition, especially what I'm talking about, is when you bump into someone and you're talking to them. So when they leave, do you feel drained? Do you feel invigorated? That sort of thing. But, intuition, what I'm saying is I want to tweak it so I can make really good decisions that best helps my path.
Yeah. So first of all, you're already very intuitive about your intuition. I'm serious. You really are. And we could keep going down this route, but the main thing I would say is having enough time where you're fully resting, just absolutely resting. So you're open and empty so that you can hear the signals that your body's telling you. It's really simple, but we don't give ourselves that kind of time, that kind of rest, that kind of openness. And then I think you and your intuition are going to be right there.
Thank you very much.
Ellen?
So this is for Kristin especially. People that do take antidepressants, a lot of times weight gain is a side effect. And do you have any tips for counteracting that? Or what causes that, that weight gain?
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing that I know about looking at those types of pharmaceuticals is really kind of what we talked about in the gut and the gut microbiome and the serotonin and everything and that could then lead to some weight gain and changes in hormones and things like that. It's very, as Tami had said, it's also very individual. So there's no one size fits all approach. A lot of times I try to be as back to the basics as possible. So when I have people that say, well, I put on 10 pounds or I just started gaining weight and I'm trying to figure out how to combat it, but I don't want to make a huge change, I'll often recommend that they will spend, let's say, 2 to 3 days, do a really good food recall, everything that hits your lips, okay, including gum, just everything. And then I have them examine what's the time frame in which they're eating. So I do think that we don't eat as our ancestors did, and that's why I like fasting, because fasting is really more in line with our circadian rhythm. And when you're out of line with the circadian rhythm, weight gain can occur as well. And obviously that has a lot to do with sleep. But then looking at that food diary and determining, okay, where are there 500 calories in my day that aren't giving me any nourishment? And we all have it, right? We all have it. There's 500 calories somewhere, usually, that aren't helping us in any way. So we could call that empty calories or non-nutrient calories, but and it's not about counting calories, but it's just looking at getting the most bang for your nutritional buck. So I think that helps. I also think after the age of 40, really looking at a reduction in carbohydrates is very helpful as well. So I think fasting, lower carb, not necessarily no carb. You still want to stay nutrient dense, but finding out what are the best carbs. I call that upgraded carbs. So instead of going low carb, it's more upgraded carbs. So getting things that have a lot more fiber and protein attached to it. And then this goes along with fasting too. I love fasting, as you can probably tell. But just giving yourself a cutoff. So there's a certain time where you just stop eating throughout the day. And I have patients all the time, they're like, oh, I didn't do well last night. I had a big bowl of chips while I watched the news, 11 o'clock news. Well, why'd you eat those chips? Well, I was hungry. So it's going back to what are you fueling at night? It's okay to go to bed a little hungry. So even just those little things, those aren't huge changes, but they're small tweaks in our current lifestyle.
I have a question for Matt. So much discussion is about inflammation. Can you talk about how sometimes inflammation is good, right? If we have a cut on our finger, we want the body to react. But what is all of this talk about inflammation and why does it cause so much disease in our body?
Sure, and actually we'll add to Kristin's point too with SSRIs. There are multiple studies showing exercise to be as effective as an SSRI for depression. So sometimes just some minor tricks, like when you feel hungry, go for a walk. You're going to actually be burning more calories instead of consuming more. It's going to have the antidepressant effect, and you have less of a need for the actual medication. So some really small changes like that, just creating habits around, I'm feeling hungry, I'm going to go for a walk, and then see if I'm hungry. Some small things like that can make a big difference over the course of a week or a month. As far as inflammation goes, it's a great question. So exercise creates inflammation. That's not a bad thing. Your body then responds to that. There's what's called a hormetic response, and you get better. So you need a little bit of inflammation. It's the chronic inflammation day in and day out that is really aging us and fueling chronic diseases. So we measure that with certain blood tests. So we don't want to completely cut down on inflammation. For example, antioxidants, which decrease inflammation. We've seen that high doses of vitamin C, for example, right after working out, blunt the effect of the exercise. So we do need a little bit of inflammation. A cold shower, a cryotherapy, right after exercise can blunt a little bit of that hormetic response. So inflammation from things like exercise is good, but too much of it is bad, and we all pretty much have too much of it. If I was to order the things that cause the most inflammation, it's pretty simple. Smoking. I think everybody here knows that smoking is bad for you. The biggest part of that is the inflammation it creates. Alcohol is inflammatory. I know everybody likes to talk about the blue zones and how people there that drink a glass or two a night have benefits. honestly, alcohol is a toxin. The reason there's the benefit there is because of the way it's consumed in social situations with love and connecting with loved ones. I don't think you get the same benefit from a couple glasses of wine if you're doing it by yourself. And I just don't. Alcohol is an inflammatory thing. Not if you do it in the right setting with the right people and it's enhancing a social experience. After that, it's foods, wheat and gluten, vegetable oils like canola oil and sugar. Those things are all very inflammatory, and the inflammation you get from those things is not positive. So those are the things if you really want to cut your levels of inflammation and in turn cut your levels of aging and chronic disease. And then there are some esoteric things, for example, electromagnetic fields, which increase inflammation, or mycotoxins. So a bunch of questions. Sorry, I talked a little too long.
Actually, that's a great follow-up, Matt. On the Health Gig podcast, you talked about the company that you founded, Wild Health. And my follow-up question is, how does CBD and hemp products help with inflammation?
They are anti-inflammatory. Again, I have a conflict. I invested in that company, so I feel a little uncomfortable talking about it. But CBD is an adaptogen. It is anti-inflammatory. There are other adaptogens as well, like ashwagandha, other foods that are anti-inflammatory as well. Again, high doses of things like antioxidants, we can overdo it. So I don't think those are the right choices, but I do think things like CBD, ashwagandha, things that help your body fight off the inflammation are probably the best ways to go about that. And then further testing, if you've eliminated all of those things, you still have high levels. I just had a patient last week. We have really good success getting people's inflammation down. We were not with her, and she had pain all over. And so I sent a mycotoxin test from Great Plains, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Dr. Freeman. And she had really high aspergillus levels. She was colonized. At some point, she had been exposed to mold. And so then we had to attack that as well. So there's kind of a list and rank order of things. But if you eliminate those big things that I mentioned, you're going a long way.
Does everyone know what an adaptogen is? No. Okay. So do you want to explain it, and do you want to take a piece of that? Both of you guys explain what an adaptogen is?
I've been
Because I think
talking a lot.
it's
So you-
important to know. And yeah.
So adaptogenic, pretty much I deal with herbs. So there are herbs that I'm sure you've heard of, rhodiola, holy basil. If you've seen Tulsi tea in the store, that's got the holy basil adaptogen in it. So they are, in theory, meant to kind of meet you where you are. So, but most people need to chill out a little bit. So in general, they pretty much are very relaxing. They support your adrenal glands. Some people will get energized from it, but a lot of them are used for sleep and dealing with stress. Is for the most people, that's what they end up using it for.
So it's like nature's medicine in a way?
Sure,
Is that how
definitely.
you would look at it? So it's natural?
Put your body in balance. Assist your body with what it needs to do, whether it needs to come up or go down. Instead of pushing you forcefully down or up, it works with your body to allow your body to adapt to what it needs.
And so one of the most popular ones is adaptogen, right? And I'm sorry, is ashwagandha. And that does exactly that. We read a lot about that, right? It lifts you up if you're tired or depressed, and if you're too up, it takes you down.
And there are even physical adaptogens. For example, earthing and grounding, walking around barefoot, I consider that to be a physical. Pulse electromagnetic field, if you're familiar with that, that's kind of a mechanical adaptogen. It helps, you can sit on a mat, a pulse electromagnetic field mat, and the magnetic field going back and forth, the anions and cations in your cell, it helps increase oxygenation, increase detox from the cells, and helps your body just do its regular processes better. So there's mechanical and there's chemical adaptogens.
So fascinating. Yes.
Hi, just a couple of things. I just wanted to mention that my physician taught me a trick with the MTHFR gene. He calls it the Monday, Thursday, Friday gene. That's how you remember it. And then also I wanted to just mention on the issue of sugar, this is for Kristin or the rest of you. You know, back in 1975, a book came out called The Sugar Blues. And so we've known about sugar and its effects for so long. It's not like it's something new. And the sugar substitutes are I think are banned in Europe. I don't think you can get them at a restaurant over there. But it's just so frustrating. I know I got off of alcohol 31 years ago because of the sugar content. But don't tell me I can't have another brownie, And I just wonder how do we, I guess the question is like comfort foods, like how do you deal when you have that need, but sugar is like the worst thing. It's a catch-22.
So one of the things, and I'm sure like Dr. Tracy and Dr. Matt, you probably have talked about this a lot with your patients as well, but finding other foods that can enhance some of those neurotransmitters. That's one way to look at it. So things like lean sources of protein. I know it's not the same as having like a Snickers bar. And God forbid, we're 1 week away from Halloween. So that's never good. But I do think that a lot of, well, I would say maybe a third of my patients that come to me, they come with just like straight sugar addiction. Right? It doesn't matter their weight or anything like that. It's one of the hardest habits to break. And you crave it at certain times in your cycle, or just there's different times that you crave it. It is sometimes beneficial for some of my patients, some of them, to have like a piece of fruit or to have some berries or to have something a little bit more nutrient dense to kind of fight against that. But in my personal experience, what's worked with my patients is completely taking it out. And that includes the artificial sweeteners. So we know that there are some negative aspects of gut microbiome with artificial sweeteners, and we're not talking about erythritol or stevia, but we're talking about aspartame, which is Splenda, or aspartame, which is equal, or sucralose, which is Splenda. So you have to give up everything that touches your taste buds that's sweet, because it's like you'll continue to want it. And on the flip side of that too, what I've seen with my patients is that they'll be off sugar and they'll feel great. And I'm just, everything is awesome. And we've done everything. We've taken like bars out of their glove compartment and we've just stripped the house of it. And that's the other thing, like having a supportive base of people that also aren't going to have sugar in the house. And then they'll just have it once and they're right back into it. Right. So I think like it's one of the hardest habits to break. If you're able to have a little sugar every once in a while and it doesn't become a binge, then that's fine. There is something to be said for everything in moderation. But it's really hard. I just think like giving it up completely is the only way to go. Because even if you allow, for some of my patients, even if they allow themselves some fruit, it's sweet enough to want something sweeter, right? But those artificial sweeteners, like they numb your taste buds, right? They're so strong that the apple doesn't cut it anymore, right? And enjoy Halloween. It's one night.
And there's a specific reason you like sugar. It's because you're a human being. So I completely gave up on trying to not eat sugar. I don't have the willpower, so I had to design my environment and not have it in my house. And we sabotage ourselves too, because our microbiome, when we feed it sugar, certain microbes actually proliferate and they send signals to you to make you crave it even more. So for me, I quit. I gave up on trying to resist because I'm not going to. If it's there, I'm going to eat it because I'm a human. I get really tired. My willpower's gone at night. So I have to design my environment. I'm too weak.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Kristin. I'm obviously a post-menopausal woman. I'm 77. And I do you recommend to your clients to just eat less? Mm-hmm. I found the last year and a half or so that I just don't need as much food. So, and by doing that, I ended up fasting between my last meal and my next meal in the morning. So that does have an effect on weight for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I talked about this at lunch with someone. Calorie restriction. If you were here last year, I started with this really fascinating study looking at the rhesus monkeys that they did this calorie restriction study on years and years and years ago. And then they kind of brought back the study and talked about what worked with the study. But there were two monkeys and one was given a calorie restricted diet. The other was not. And it's like the difference in what they look like from the aging process, from the longevity process. The other thing with fasting, as you had said you have done, and calorie restriction fasting is a little bit different. But with the fasting, if you are doing certain types of fasting, you can go through something that's called autophagy. And autophagy is cellular turnover, cellular optimization, and that we know, at least in animals, not a lot of human data, but in animal data, very strong connection to longevity, increased mortality, decreased mortality, things of that nature. So I do think that we eat around the clock, which isn't normal, which I've said already, but we also eat too much. So what I call that is overfueling. So you need to fuel really only to the extent of when you're going to be able to utilize that energy. So we gain weight for a lot of different reasons, but one of them is that we go to bed and we've overfueled. We just had too much food and we can't burn it off. There's no place to put it, right? So I think I'm a big believer in calorie restriction. I'm a big believer. That's why I always say that you should eat until you're no longer hungry and not till you're full. Because once you get to the fullness and you've ignored leptin, trying to tell you like, you're done, you're done, you're done, you're done, we ignore it, you've overfueled. And that fuel's got to go somewhere.
Dora.
This is a question from the back row. I've been asked to ask Tami. So we're seeing a lot of chief mindfulness officers in companies. Could you talk a little bit about mindfulness in the workplace and how have you seen that change and what's going on?
It's wonderful to see the interest that's been on the rise with mindfulness in the workplace. I think we each have to figure out how to do that. At Sounds True, we've come up with some interesting methods. We have a minute of silence at the beginning of all of our meetings. And what's interesting is that a minute of silence, it doesn't sound even like mindfulness. It doesn't sound spiritual. What is it? We're just being silent for a minute. And the way we frame it is it gives everybody a chance to land and be here. Have you ever tried to start a meeting when everybody's kind of talking over each other and you don't even really know, like, are we in the meeting? Are we still talking about the weekend? Or have we started? Et cetera. So it can be framed in a very business-friendly context, which is this is a chance to clear our mind. It's a chance to be fully here. And, it sounds true. We say it's also a chance to feel how we're all in this interconnected web together. You can pray if you want. I mean, we say things like that, but of course you don't have to. You can just have a minute of quiet to clear your mind. The other thing that we do at Sounds True that's interesting, and I learned that 50% of companies actually allow this, which is we allow canines in the office. And I don't know if you knew that 50% of businesses nationwide let you bring your dog. But the cool thing about bringing your dog is that your dog needs to go out and you need to take your dog out. And before you know it, you're outside with your dog, taking a walk, looking at the sky, out, getting fresh air. There's a meditation teacher we work with who talks about the corporate non-cigarette breathing break, where you go outside and you pretend you're smoking a cigarette. And it has all the mindfulness benefits. So it's wonderful that people are getting educated on it. I think the overall thrust is our workday doesn't serve us well when it's an 8 to 10 hour unpunctuated sentence. There's no punctuation. There's never a period and then a space. It's just, and that having that pause, however you get it, even if it's going to the washroom and taking some extra time for whatever reason you need to say you need to go, we need that time. We need to build in those moments of reflection and pause.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for everything. I have a question, if you don't mind if I can video the answer. I'm a mother of 4 young children, and diet and eating the right thing is very challenging in our home because all of their friends have what they call the, quote, tasty snacks, unquote. And so what I've been telling my kids is that, if you eat enough of the healthy stuff, every once in a while, if we go to a party or there's a special occasion and we go somewhere else and they have these tasty snacks and unhealthy food, that their body will move it out. It won't, if you have it every day, you have it regularly, that it's, gonna lead them to road of disease. So do you have any suggestions in how to respond to this situation? Especially they're all in the age of growth spurts where they want to just eat like crazy.
That's been a very big struggle in my house. I have 4 children as well. They're 10, 7, 3, and 1. And they love sugar because they're humans. Right? They just do. And it's everywhere. It created a lot of stress for me, knowing what it does. And what I do now is a couple things. Number one, just like for myself, I design the environment. I design their environment where it's not accessible and easy. When we go to a birthday party or something, though, frequently my kids would say, why can't we just be normal kids? Which first off, I respond, that's the worst thing I can imagine, to be a normal American. But the way I address that with them realistically is I try not to really restrict them that much in those scenarios. I just try to teach them. When they're eating their broccoli at home, I want them to know what it's doing to their body, how they're getting stronger, how it's affecting their brain and their microbiome and the sulforaphane in the broccoli. And when they want to have a sweet or sugar snack and it's there, say, okay, look, you're smart. You can make decisions. Do you understand what it's going to do, the effect? And if they can tell me what the effect is and they understand it, then they can make that choice. I'm not a child psychiatrist. My wife is, but I don't know about this really strict restriction, what that's going to do to their desire for it and what's going to happen. So my solution has been to design the environment at home, control as much as I can, and then just educate, make sure they understand, and trust that the example that we're setting for them and what we eat is going to play a big role in what they eat long term.
I would say that I'm lazier than him, I think. So I just bartered with my children, and I'm like, all right, if you drink this green thing in the morning, I will not harass you for the rest of the day. And so that is our arrangement. I basically have a drink that they think is from you know where, and I'm like, you down that and we're good. I'm not going to bother you. But I know that they're getting, it's a dehydrated drink that has 5,000 ORAC in one scoop. And so that's the foundation, and then I add multivitamin, everything, because I know my little one, God doesn't give you 2 children the same. They're all different. That one, who's a carbaholic, he needs that. And I have my children too late to have the energy to fight with them.
So you want to design, educate, or bribe. Those are the 3 things.
You're good. Okay. Yeah, back there, and then we'll come up here.
It seems that the only safe place to go in the supermarket these days is the produce and vegetable section. Is there any benefit can you distinguish between the importance of, can you talk about the importance of eating organic food as opposed to foods produced by industrialized agriculture, especially processed foods?
Yeah, so from the perspective of organics, you probably have seen in the past few months there have been some studies really showing some superior nutritional benefit in some organic foods. Now, we've also had studies showing that that wasn't the case in some organic foods. So I think it depends on your situation. For some of the patients that I've had, they can't afford for everything to be organic. And so from that perspective, what I would say as well is I would look at the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, which you have a list of in your packet today, which I think is great. And then things like dairy, if you are going to have dairy, to look at that. I think where you get your meat from is very important. Grass finish, things like that, I think are very important. So for me, I always try and meet the patient where they are and what they can afford to do. I think if you can eat everything organic, great, fabulous. But if you can't, it doesn't mean that you can't have a nutrient-dense diet. And so that's what I'm just always trying to communicate to my patients.
And to speak to some of the older studies that didn't show much of a difference, I always look at studies like what's the motivation here, and a lot of those I think miss the point. We have this reductionist idea of food and nutrients, and they would say, is there the same amount of folate or same amount of vitamin A? That's not really the point. A big part of eating organic foods is avoiding some of the things like the pesticides and the glyphosate, which have really terrible consequences for you. So I look at food, there's kind of a hierarchy. The processed foods you get in a box are really doing a lot of harm, the pesticides and things that are in those. If you're going to the supermarket, as long as you stay on the outside, you're getting whole foods, things that aren't in a box, you're doing better. From there, if you can get organic, that's even a step up. From there, I don't actually go to the supermarket anymore because I know the farmers in my community. If I can get food from someone who I knew who grew it, then I feel even better. And then a step above that is if you can grow it yourself. And I think we underestimate our ability to produce our own food. I grow quite a bit of food. I have hundreds of logs inoculated with culinary mushrooms to give us a really abundant source of food where I live. Even a really small yard can produce a lot of food if you just put some time and get some exercise while you're doing it, and some sunlight while you're doing it, and you're exposed to the soil. So to me, there's a hierarchy, and I think the closer we can get to that, producing our own, or knowing who grew it, knowing where it came from, eating organic, outside of the supermarket, the higher we can get on that food chain, and the more often, the better. And I worry because sometimes I feel like maybe that's a little elitist. Some people don't have the room to grow their own food. You can't be at the top all the time. But the closer we can get to that ideal, the healthier I think we're going to be. Because it does all start. It's a cliche to say you are what you eat, but every cell in your body is made up of exactly what you put in it. So it's, to me, there's nothing more important and more fundamental than that.
Yeah, I have a question for Tami. This time of the year, everyone's very busy, and I am too. What would be a good way to start meditating? How would you recommend kind of getting involved in that for a beginner, novice?
Sure. Well, we can do it right now, which is we can just enjoy our inhale. You don't even have to change how you're sitting, just really enjoy the inhale. And then at the top of the inhale, just take a moment. Nothing's happening. And then have the most beautiful exhale. Oh my God, so nice. Just let everything go. The relaxation. And then there's a weird space at the end of the exhale. You can actually get interested in it. And then do it again. And see if you can really enjoy your inhale. Feel how it comes into your body. And maybe you even feel like a little bright, fluttery, glittery feeling as you inhale. And then at the top, it's like there's this fullness of life and potential. And the exhale is a chance where you get to relax and drop a little bit more in your seat and feel the force of gravity. And oh, God, it's so nice, right? Just the exhale. And then that interesting space before life comes in again. So this cycle of our breathing, it's always available to us. And so when we're waiting at an elevator or in a bathroom line, and what most of us do most of the time is we go for our phone. I was sitting in the hotel lobby this morning for about 5 minutes, and a gentleman and I were both sitting there without our phones. And he looked at me and he said, this is the first time I've sat with someone in a lobby like this where they weren't on their phone the whole time. Like, no one does that anymore. And then we started talking to each other. So my point is that our natural breathing process, as I just described it, and the joy and actual elation that's embedded in it is available to us in every breath. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay. Could you, Kristin, can you please talk about the difference between natural and refined sugars effect? Okay. Natural and refined sugars effect on the body, and is there such a thing as eating too much fruit a day? I think someone actually told me, don't have too much fruit a day because that's all sugar also.
I think there's a lot of confusion right now with like natural and refined. So I think people feel that things like honey and maple syrup won't spike your blood sugar and your insulin, but they will. even though there are some benefits. There's definitely benefits to Manuka honey, for example. There's some antimicrobial benefits. There's some benefits to maple syrup. So we know that there's some benefits, but if you look at, for example, the slide I had for Walter Willett showing like what happens to insulin and blood sugar, the effect is really the same in terms of what's going to happen. The sweetness might not be as much. So with more of a refined sugar, sometimes the sweetness is so much more intense. And so as I was talking to the woman a few minutes ago, the more sweet you have, the more you want. But I do think that sometimes we give things like honey and maple syrup kind of a free pass. And we might even call something like a bar or a granola or anything that, oh, well, this doesn't have any sugars in it, but does, even though it might not be refined. So it's the ideal source if you want to have a little honey in your coffee or something like that, even above and beyond an artificial sweetener, but it's still going to have the impact on the insulin and the blood sugar. And so for most of my patients, especially the postmenopausal women, I am always trying to find ways to suppress insulin and blood sugar and to make it more even keel. So giving kind of free rein for those types of sugars won't work. From the fruit perspective, it depends on your situation. So obviously I have some patients whose 3-month assessment, which is a hemoglobin A1C of blood sugar, is higher than we would like, and I do limit their fruit consumption. For sure. But I also sometimes will talk to my patients about specifically glycemic load of fruit. So we have glycemic index and glycemic load. I like to use glycemic load because it incorporates fiber as well, and it incorporates those other things that what I always tell my patients is that if you're going to have sugar, you want it to have to compete with something else for digestion. So if you have, let's compare an orange to orange juice. If you have orange juice, it's just pure sugar. You just could drink it down, you get this huge boost, the spike, the drop, etc. If you have an orange, though, you've got some fiber. And the body can't digest fiber. So now the body's like, well, I got to do something with that. And then I have the sugar, and I got to figure out how to do this. So as we were saying, as Dr. Matt had said, a hierarchy, you also have to do a hierarchy for how you're eating as well and create that competition if sugar is one thing that you're going to have. So for most of my patients, I would say, depending on their situation, if they're not someone who wants to be low carb, I usually allow about 4 half-cup servings of fruit a day. If they can do more non-starchy vegetables in place of fruit, I kind of like that better because I just feel like we don't get enough greens and things of that nature. So I don't necessarily tell my patients not to have fruit, but I want them to have that hierarchy, look at things that have more of a higher or rather a lower glycemic load. So stone fruits, apples, berries, pears, those would all have a little bit more of a glycemic load than other things.
And you can measure that as well. So I am just weird enough that I usually wear a continuous glucose monitor. I want to know how every food affects me, and a lot of my patients, I give them one as well, just as an educational experience to see how different foods affect your blood sugar. And the thing, I think the biggest spike I ever saw was from eating a big handful of raisins one time.
Yeah.
And I see that with a lot of fruits. Most of the fruits that we eat today that are kind of bred to not be like wild fruit, which is a lot different. And the same, that just as Kristin was saying, if I eat a piece of chocolate at night, it's amazing the difference in the spike in my glucose and the glycemic variability. If I just have a handful of walnuts with it, it slows it down tremendously. You get a much smoother. And that glycemic variability, that spike in glucose and insulin, is a big driver of inflammation and aging as well. So continuous glucose monitors are great too. I don't think you need to wear one all the time. You don't need to be as weird as I am. But if you did it for a certain period of time to see how different foods affect you, it would be nice information to have personally.
And how does hydration play in blood sugars?
Personally, I haven't seen a big variability, but there are other things like sleep deprivation. If I haven't had a good night's sleep, my insulin sensitivity, how big of a spike I get, is much bigger than if I'm well rested. So hydration, I think probably plays a pretty good role. I haven't personally noticed that. I don't know any good studies pointing to it. But your stress level, so if you have a very stressful conversation or situation, that cortisol spike will shoot your glucose up as well. So stress levels, sleep, the things that we talk about, which we don't think we can quantify, you actually can. There are tools you can actually see that. And once you see that, then I think it really helps guide your lifestyle to realize how the stress reduction, getting good sleep, those things really affect your health in numbers, in real quantifiable ways.
And the sleep deprivation also, it changes how your digestive hormones work as well. So when you don't get enough sleep, the reason we see this connection sometimes with overeating and obesity with lack of sleep is you look at ghrelin, you looked at leptin, and ghrelin's supposed to tell you when you're hungry, leptin's supposed to tell you when to stop eating, and those kind of flip-flop when you don't get enough sleep. So the ghrelin is constantly on, and the leptin's not telling you to stop eating. So if anyone remembers ever pulling an all-nighter, and the next day you're like, why can't I eat enough pizza? That's why. Right? So that's just those cravings and everything. So I think Dr. Matt brings up a great point in that all of this, of course, is important, but if you're not getting enough sleep at night, good luck with any of it, right? Good luck with any of it.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about not being able to avoid sugar and things like that. I've seen, we haven't talked about it here today, I've seen promotions that suggest that taking probiotic capsules to help your gut reestablish a better balance of the microbiome. Where do you stand on probiotics?
I think there's a lot of potential. We know how important the microbiome is. The issue is that most of studies show after about 2 years of age, it's really difficult to change your microbiome. Some studies do show a positive benefit with probiotics. Other studies where they've given people probiotics, they really have a very similar microbiome afterwards. So honestly, I think the jury is still out. I don't have a strong opinion on probiotics or not. I think that we're going to have much better options in the near future. I don't think they're harmful. When patients want to take them, I encourage them to do that. And but I say let's be a little bit mindful. Let's watch and let's see how you feel and trust yourself a little bit, because there's not great evidence one way or the other, in my opinion.
Hi, breaking the rules. I have 2 questions here. So one's for Dr. Dawson. Have you worked with athletes who've kind of experienced like a shock where they have this really active lifestyle and then go sedentary, whether it's due to injury or not being an athlete anymore? And do you have any advice about, how to get your system back on track? And then the second question is, being in DC, we have a lot of social options that revolve around food and alcohol. So for everyone, are there any suggestions in terms of socially how to engage where you're not always going out to a restaurant, eating bad foods, or going to bars, etc.?
Yeah, for athletes, so I knew someone one time who played a couple sports in college, then he quit, and then he quickly went to over 200 pounds. That person was me, and I realized that I had to change my lifestyle and my eating. Our eating a lot of times is so much driven by our habits and not by our actual energy expenditures and needs. So when an athlete stops competing, they really have to be mindful and start to tune in into when they're hungry and where they're not, and really focus on that, or else it's going to get out of control pretty quickly. It's a very common thing you see, and we all have multiple athletes pictured in our head right now that we've seen that happen to. So I think it's just mindfulness and being intentional about what you eat and when, and measuring it, stepping on the scales frequently and making sure it's not getting out of control. What was your other question? It was about... I'm not in D.C., I'm in Kentucky, so it's a little different. So I'll let somebody that lives in a big city answer that.
Well, I mean, I don't know if Tami would agree with me. I think she would, but we both live in Colorado, which is different, a little bit different from D.C. But I know, like, a lot of the groups that I have, like my mom's groups, we have hiking clubs and things like that, so that we do that sometimes instead of going out to dinner. But we have a lot of resources, which they do here in D.C. as well. So
I think setting up a couple rules for yourself too. So I'll give you a tip on alcohol and drinking. I like alcohol. I like to drink a good wine or bourbon. I'm from Kentucky. But I have some specific rules and the way I do it to decrease and mitigate the harm from it. So if I'm drinking in the evening, I'm going to have usually one drink. I only drink on an empty stomach before dinner, and which is strange, but let me tell you why. When I drink on an empty stomach, if I have one drink right before dinner, it metabolizes quickly. I feel the entire thing. I get the benefit that I wanted from it. And I don't drink any with dinner. I don't drink any after. And I've noticed with my Oura Ring, it doesn't affect my sleep. If I have that same drink after dinner, I don't get much of the benefit, and all it does is trickle in my system overnight, and it destroys my deep sleep. So just little things like that can make a big difference. So if you're going to go out, have a rule for yourself. I'm not going to keep myself from drinking. I'm going to have one or two. but it's going to be before I eat or a certain time period. And then if you notice that the fact that you've drank leads to more, then change that rule. But having some rules and having a plan when you go out, I think it really help.
I think also choosing what's best in front of you, right? So it may not be the best. It's just relative to what your choices are. That's the best in that moment. And then that's all you can do. You kind of have to don't stress over it, right? Because then it never ends in terms of the ill effects of it. And then also I think moderation will take you pretty far as well. So it's more baby steps as opposed to this, not that. Because otherwise in DC, I get what you're saying. It's a busy town. You'll never win. You'll never have a sense of accomplishment. But if you can look at it and make the best relative choice, then you get a sense, it won't stress you out about it as much.
And a really sneaky thing, I'll sometimes go empty the beer can out later in the night if I'm at a party and fill it up with water, and nobody knows the difference.
Do we have time for one more question? Yeah, we can take one more. How about right here? Two. Just shout it out.
This is for Tracy. When we met earlier, you mentioned something which really got me thinking, which is the vegetables and fruit that we're eating right now do not have the same nutritional content as what we ate 20 years ago. I run an organic farm, and I'm starting to think about that. And I know we've seen that a lot in Asia. The rice just doesn't fill you up the way rice used to because of all these fast-growing rice grains that have come into the market. So how does that work with organic food? Is organic food also nutritionally more deprived? And what do you do about the trace elements that you're going to miss out on?
So honestly, from what I read, and I haven't gone as deep into it, I imagine Kristin would know more about the organic food. What I read was that organic had better nutritional value. Of course, I probably read from more biased sources on that, would be the truth in that. But the issue I think we were discussing is the soil. So our soil is depleting more so, and our food gets its nutrition, hopefully, from the soil. And so I read an article on how we're really having soil that it doesn't have what it used to have. And I don't know how you mount that. We have so many problems that in the world of nutrition and health that as an individual person is almost frightening, right? And so if our soil is depleted, I'm sure someone who studies soil knows the answer to this, but I honestly don't know what that is.
And actually the rising CO2 levels actually cause vegetables to grow quickly and bigger and less nutrients in general too. So honestly, I think we just have to try harder to get our nutrients. I don't think there are a lot of great solutions. If we can heal the soil and we can grow food in good soil with a good microbiome of the soil as well, great, but it's just all foods are going to be a little less nutrient dense right now than they were 20 to 30 years ago, even the organic versions. It's a big problem. Yes, it affects our own microbiome. Glyphosate specifically is a big problem. So the less pesticides, less chemicals, the better. It's really interesting. You look at foods in Asia in the grocery stores, a lot of times they prize foods that have little nibble holes from insects. Here, they're beautiful in our supermarket because we use these pesticides. But in Asia, a lot of times they feel like if it's not good enough for the insects, it's not good enough for me. Why are the insects not wanting this? So I love an ugly vegetable.
Well, thank you all for taking the time.